Former President Jacob Zuma of the Republic of South Africa has certainly achieved much in the court. He has just been granted medical parole. And the strange thing about that, and I have a legal brief a sort of email which I get from South Africa's Law Society of South Africa, which they send out. But it's something which really struck me when I was reading about the medical parole and the fact that it's imposed by a doctor's report is that Zuma is being very selective in which doctors are allowed to look at him. And he said, and this is from the most recent legal brief, it has criminal fed up Zuma may risk court's wrath. And it says former President Jacob Zuma is considering refusing to be examined by NPA, that's National Prosecuting Authority appointed doctors, because he is tired of his claims of ill health being treated with distrust, according to his foundation. Should he refuse to be examined, notes legal brief, it would be in the face of an order by KZN, that's KwaZulu-Natal High Court, Pietermaritzburg, Judge Pete Cohen, that the agreement of Zuma's with the agreement of Zuma's counsel, Advocate Dalian Mpofu, senior counsel, that the state may grant a medical practitioner of its choice to examine Mr. Zuma to assess his ability to stand trial for corruption and for that doctor to be a witness if necessary. And such defiance would risk another contempt ruling against the former president, and it goes on and so forth, because Zuma has been trying to get out of his corruption trial via medical parole type of reasons. Now, Zuma was jailed quite recently, and he was jailed in July for 15 months for contempt of court because he refused a court order to appear before the State Capture Commission, which was investigating corruption claims during his tenure as president and so forth. Now, President Zuma was alleged to have taken bribes to have a corrupt relationship, which Mr. Shabir Sheikh was convicted of having with him in court. And in 2nd of June 2005, Shabir Sheikh was found guilty of corruption and fraud. And Mr. Zuma was dismissed by then President Thabo Mbeki as a deputy. But Mr. Sheikh was then on the 3rd of March 2009 released on medical parole after just about 2 years of his 15-year sentence. And he then went to all sorts of places, private game reserve. We're told that his parole officer had given him permission to recuperate. He'd been doing golf and all sorts of other things. And if you look at what happened a bit later on with him, is that Mr. Sheikh continued supposedly terminally ill, but really enjoying his life and still enjoying his life. And then you hear about how in May 2020, he was released following, it was his first celebration of Ramadan, where he was a free man. But he had been released in terms of Cyril Ramaphosa releasing people in December 2019, including him, on remissions. And it says that he was 13 years into his sentence, but he was serving the sentence on medical parole, which means he was serving it in the community. He wasn't actually being forced to endure jail time in the sense that any ordinary person would do. And of course, Mr. Zuma has been paroled with medical parole, though this is a man who's been paroled based seemingly on doctors who are allowed to examine him, while the state's prosecutors, doctors who agreed to allow to examine him are not allowed to. So that's a pretty odd sort of thing. And what's even more odd comes about in this actual statement, which was released by the Correctional Services Department. And they say that apart from being terminally ill, and you think, oh, he's terminally ill, what? And physically incapacitated, but no, that's not him. It's inmates suffering from an illness that severely limits their daily activities or self-care can be considered for medical parole. And they also go on to say that it's an option available to all sentence offenders, but most don't seem to be given it. and they appeal to all South Africans to support Mr. Zuma dignity as he continues to receive medical treatment. Now, Mr. Zuma, when he actually was arrested, firstly, he decided that he would not turn himself over to jail, but he would in fact just sit around and have his supporters around him. And then he said to prevent bloodshed, he would. And then riots started after he was arrested by people who said they were supporting him. And if you look at the actual death toll of those riots, it's in the 300s, and it was something like 337. And Mr. Zuma did not go around announcing the riots or trying to stop the riots. He simply um, allowed things to go on with it. And a lot of people died, a lot of property was damaged, and it was a very intense process. And yet, after Mr. Zuma's supporters go on this rioting, and after he's been jailed for something like 2 months of his actual sentence, he gains medical parole. I'm going to read the statement in full. It says, 5th of September 2021, Mr. Zuma placed on medical parole. The Department of Correctional Services, DCS, is able to confirm that Mr. Jacob, I'm not going to read his second name, Zuma, has been placed on medical parole. Section 757A of the Correctional Services Act 111 of 1998 affords the National Commissioner a responsibility to place under correctional supervision or day parole or grants parole on medical parole to a sentenced offender serving a sentence of incarceration for 24 months or less. The National Commissioner is also, in terms of Section 52, empowered to prescribe conditions of parole. Medical parole is parole's eligibility for Mr. Zuma is imposed by a medical report received by the Department of Correctional Services. Apart from being terminally ill and physically incapacitated, inmates suffering from an illness that severely limits their daily activity or self-care can also be considered for medical parole. The risk of reoffending of released inmates must also be low, and there must be appropriate arrangements for the inmate supervision, care, and treatment without the community to which the inmate is to be released to. Medical parole placement for Mr. Zuma means that he will complete the remainder of the sentence in the system of community corrections, whereby he must comply with specific set of conditions and will be subject to supervision until his sentence expires. Medical parole can only be revoked if an offender does not comply with the placement conditions. We want to reiterate that placement on medical parole is an option available to all sentenced offenders, provided they meet all the requirements. We appeal to all South Africans to support Mr. Zuma's dignity as he continues to receive medical treatment. What medical treatment? What exactly is wrong with Mr. Zuma? And why is it that if something is so very wrong with Mr. Zuma, that we are not allowed to have independent examination of his health?